Good afternoon. I'm Ken Wallach. I'm chairman of the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. It is my pleasure to welcome you, whether you are here in person or watching online, to the NED's 2022 Democracy Award ceremony. If you would like to join the conversation on Twitter, please tag us at Ned Democracy, that's 1D, and use the hashtag DemAward, AWD. I would like to say a special word of thanks to the Hereford Foundation for their generous support of this event. Every year, the NED Board of Directors uses the Democracy Award to highlight the accomplishments and usually the courage of democratic activists who are involved in some of the most important political movements of our time. This year, the choice of honorees was easy because the example of courage and commitment of Ukrainian civil society is on full display every day. The will of the Ukrainian people to protect their nation, their freedoms, and the democratic values and institutions they have been building for decades, they are an inspiration to the entire world. I am very proud to note that all four of our honorees are NED partners: the Center for Civil Liberties, the Public Interest Journalism Lab, the Ukrainian Volunteer Service, the Anti-Corruption Action Center. You will hear much more about them. They are representative of a much broader civil society movement in Ukraine, which the NED has been supporting since 1983. 103 partners in total. On a related but important note, we also commemorate today the 40th anniversary of President Ronald Reagan's historic speech before the British Parliament, in which he called for the community of democratic nations to wage a global campaign to defend and promote the infrastructure of democracy. The so-called Westminster Address on June 8, 1982, led to the bipartisan initiative spearheaded by the then chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Dante Fascell, that created this endowment and its four affiliated institutes: NDI, IRI, the Solidarity Center, and SIPE. I think that President Reagan and Dante would be proud that 40 years later, the institution that they launched would be supporting more than 100 groups working to protect the sovereignty and freedom of Ukraine. Last week, a bipartisan working group under the auspices of the Ronald Reagan Institute released a report on the occasion of the anniversary that proposes a new and expansive democracy stimulus to confront the most recent challenges to democracy. I had the privilege to co-chair this initiative with Mark Green, the head of the Wilson Center, the former administrator of USAID, and the president of IRI. I hope you will all take the opportunity to read our report. The lessons of Ukraine feature prominently. Now let me turn the program over to Damon Wilson, virtually, the president of the endowment, who, needless to say, deeply regrets not being with us in person because of his COVID quarantine. We are also disappointed, but understanding. Damon?
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership. I want to thank all of you who are with us this evening, especially our honorees, Anna, Daria, Alexandra, Natalia. We're so proud to be honoring you. And I incredibly regret that I'm not there with you in person. But just out of an abundance of caution, I'm finishing my own quarantine from asymptomatic COVID, so I'm totally fine. But this evening, we honor Ukrainian civil society, represented by four remarkable patriots, all extraordinary women of strength, ingenuity, and courage. They represent why Ukraine will succeed and Putinism will fail. Russian forces stormed Ukraine not really realizing that they would be fighting the entire Ukrainian people. People activated and mobilized in 1991 to gain their independence, bringing down the Soviet Union. In 2004, to overturn a stolen election. And again in 2014, to insist on being part of the European family of free nations, these people whose identity Putin dares to deny joined together to resist Russian occupation. In my own visit to Ukraine in early May, I saw a unified resolve underlying that Ukraine can win and secure its freedom. I saw that Ukraine's democratic development, led by its people and civil society, is an essential ingredient to this resilience and its continued success. In Bucha and Borodianka, I saw evidence of the horrors and atrocities inflicted on the people of Ukraine, which explains why they will never surrender, why they cannot surrender. In the main square of Borodianka, I visited a statue of Taras Shevchenko, Ukraine's renowned national poet. He represents Ukrainian identity. Russian soldiers had shot at the statue's head, symbolically underscoring what Putin's war was about, wiping out Ukraine as a free people. And yet the deputy mayor spoke to us without hesitation about rebuilding. And the women you will meet tonight and the larger communities they represent are part of why Ukraine can win, reintegrate its occupied people, and rebuild a stronger democracy. Ukrainians are doing more than their part in this fight. And the question is, can we, those who live in freedom and democracy around the world, do our part? Ukrainians are fighting for our values, and we owe them unequivocal support. Now's not the time to be tentative. Now is not the time to discuss abandoning more than 3 million people or 20% of Ukraine's territory beyond occupied lines. Now is not the time for fatigue. At the endowment, we are mobilized to support 103 partners across the country. We're proud that we've been flexible, standing by all of our partners as they pivoted their own wartime efforts in wartime, to providing emergency support, documenting atrocities, advocating for Ukraine around the world, ensuring Ukraine's story reaches domestic and international audiences, and supporting nonviolent resistance. But Ned's story begins much earlier, as Ken said. In 1989, 3 years before the fall of the Soviet Union, we began our first grants to support Ukrainian civil society. That support has grown, making Ukraine our third largest program this year. This is the legacy of a beloved Ned colleague, the late Nadia Duke. Nadia helped Ned connect to and understand Ukraine, and thanks to Nadia, by the time the Soviet Union collapsed, Ned had already established relationships of trust between the endowment and some of Ukraine's most prominent democratic thinkers and a handful of young and up-and-coming activists. It was the beginning of quite a relationship that's grown deeper, broader over the years, and from which we have learned so much. But indeed, our approach at Ned is built on relationships, on people, much more than projects. And these 4 awardees underscore that emphasis. Our approach is also built on listening to our partners, and our awardees have clear messages. Natalia Gomez has made it clear that there is no choice but to defeat Russia. Writing in the Washington Post, she says, "We don't see airstrikes on maternity hospitals and bomb shelters where kids and women hide as invitations to negotiate. We see them as demonstrations of what the Kremlin will do to Ukrainians if it can. It's not about pride. It's not about survival. We have no choice but to win. If we lose, we know what awaits us." Anna Bondarenko has shown us that Ukraine's success is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. There's so much beauty in how people help each other and how they are giving their time, their emotions, their talents, their skills to help Ukraine win, she says. Alexandra Matvichuk has made it clear that citizens of democracies around the world can help. There are no indifferent people now in Ukraine, she says. And I know that ordinary people have much more power than they ever expected to have, and massive mobilization of ordinary people in different countries can change this world for the better. And Daria Kalanyuk helps us understand that we defeat Putin by helping Ukraine win. Progress in building rule of law and fighting corruption in Ukraine posed a serious threat to the Russian totalitarian regime and Russian kleptocracy, she said. Success in Ukraine, success for people living in dignity, means the end of authoritarian kleptocracy in Russia. Let's listen to them. Friday marked 100 days since Russia's latest attack on Ukraine began. And on Saturday, June 4th, we commemorated the 33rd anniversary of the Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests crushed by Chinese communists. And there's a through line that unites all of those who struggle for freedom. And that's why it's so appropriate that the Ned Democracy Award, which you'll see tonight, is a replica of the goddess of democracy that was erected in Tiananmen Square during the Movement for Freedom and Democracy in 1989. Destroyed by a tank, an unforgettable image. It reminds us that liberty may be delayed, but it cannot be denied. So tonight we honor those who represent this generation's successful fight for liberty. And while we honor 4 organizations tonight, I want to thank all of our partners for their spirit, their courage, and commitment to a democratic Ukraine. I also want to give a shout out to the team at NED who has worked so hard to help our partners through this very difficult, traumatic time. I'm so proud to work with you. And I also want to thank our chair, Ken, for stepping in, for our board members, and Applebaum, Milan, Vervier, who you will hear from tonight, as well as Senator Risch, who will be joining us. And I want to acknowledge Speaker Pelosi, Representative Gregory Meeks, who were pulled away by votes on the Hill this evening. But finally, I want to close by referring to where Ken began, President Reagan's Westminster address, as we mark the 40th anniversary today. And in that speech, Reagan looked back at the Battle of Britain, referencing an island incandescent with courage. And he saw the British resistance against all odds in World War II as an inspiration that even at the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the threats it posed to peace and freedom could and would be defeated. What I am describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term, the march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history, he said. It's impossible to look at Ukraine today and not draw the same parallel. Ukraine is indeed incandescent with courage. That light comes from people like the 4 women we honor tonight, individuals acting together to defend freedom. And it's their success which will make the late Madeleine Albright's prophecy of a coming democratic revival come true. I'm now pleased to introduce Ambassador Oksana Makarova. There's a lot of discussion in public about the weapons Ukraine needs, but the ambassador is Ukraine's not-so-secret weapon here in Washington, an articulate, compelling, determined representative of Ukraine in the United States, equally at ease making the case in private to President Biden and members of Congress or the American people on Sunday talk shows and morning radio programs. She served here since February 2021. A former minister of finance, before the war, she was known as an innovator, bringing a digital-first mindset and an open data approach to Ukrainian finances. So let me invite our friend and our colleague to offer a few words. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Damon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, all board members and Ned. And I'm, especially happy to be here on this very special occasion devoted to democracy. Today we celebrate, as Damon said, remarkable achievements of Ukrainian civil society, which is represented by 4 remarkable representatives. The 4 women leaders, which is also very, very symbolic about Ukraine. Women who we all know, but women also whose courageous civic activism has strengthened our country from within. And that strength that was built, especially during the last 8 years, enabled us to fight with the external threat. I would like to start with thanking all of you, Daria, Anna, Natalia, and Alexandra, for your hard work. We all know how hard it is to do what you do, for your hard fight for democracy, for freedom of press, to fight against the corruption, for human values and human dignity in so many areas in Ukraine, but also how during the past 405 days, you have changed everything you do and took it to another level and fight together with our brave defenders for something that we all fight as a country. You represent the best of Ukraine's national character. Looking at you, you are strong, you are independent, you're determined to do what you want to do, and you have the compassion with which you do what you do. And this is so true about the Ukrainian civil society. I would like to thank also the National Endowment for Democracy for your tireless support, even before the Soviet Union collapsed, as Damon described today, for remarkable job, finding all these leaders everywhere, helping them to emerge, helping them to build the capacity, helping them to build the horizontal connections. So important. We see it all tested again during this full-fledged phase of the war that started 100 years ago, but we also saw it tested during the past 8 years. Throughout years, Ned worked with civil society, with non-for-profits, with small groups of people, and really emboldened them, empowered them to do what they're doing today. Now, for the past 105 days, we continue to fight the war, which we started to fight 8 years ago, but actually as a country, which we fought for centuries. And we fight it for freedom and democracy. And it's very important for us, because democracy is a foundation upon which Kievan Rus was founded many centuries ago when Muscovites did not even exist. Democracy is something that differentiates us in all the fights in the previous century. Democracy is what we tried to build every time we had even a slight chance in independence, like in 1918. But before, we always built it without strong army and without really strong allies and friends. This time is different. This time our civil society building it together with a very brave defenders, with our armed forces, with veterans, and most importantly also with our strategic friends and allies who help us in this fight. But very important, critical, I would say, ingredient is the civil society. You know, Russian army is not fighting just with our brave defenders. Russian army did not only meet the resistance of our brave president, who from the beginning is leading. Russians are fighting with all 40 million. Regardless of what we believe, regardless of what language do we speak, regardless of what we see as the future for our children, but all of us have one common thing. We all love Ukraine, we all want to live in freedom and democracy, and we all will fight for it. So that's why, I would like to conclude by, again, agreeing with Damon, because you cannot look at this remarkable 4 women and the women at the board and not remember our friend, late Nadia Duke, who has been instrumental in everything that Ned is doing. And, I would just want to close with one phrase that Nadia said during the Orange Revolution, when we were discussing, what to do and how to do it, and whether, we can win the Orange Revolution at the beginning when it started. And she said, everyone understands what is at stake, and everyone stands united. And this phrase is even more important today, because we cannot forget what is at stake for us, and we have to stand united. And the urgency of this moment to stand united goes to all of us. The president, armed forces, the defenders, the territorial defense, but all of the civil society. Because everything that these brave 4 women, and in their face, all of the civil society in Ukraine is fighting for, democracy, freedom of press, Ukraine free of corruption, Ukraine free of state capture, Ukraine free of... This is exactly what we are fighting today against our enemy, because this is exactly what Russia represents today. Everything that is wrong and what we don't and we will not have in Ukraine after we win. So, God save our troops, glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini, and God bless America. Thank you.
Last June, my wife and I attended a small dinner at the home of Milan Vervier, where a new Ukrainian ambassador and a former diplomat, Madeleine Albright, were present. The ambassador, like the elder stateswoman, was smart and articulate and spoke passionately about democratic values and principles. The similarities did not end there. It was baptism by fire for Ambassador Makarova. For a little over 6 months later, her country was fighting for its survival, and she became the voice of Ukraine in the halls of Congress, the corridors of the State Department, and to the American people. She has been the consummate diplomat, but like Madeleine, she does not let diplomacy get in the way when defending her country or the principles for which it was fighting. Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us. It is only fitting that we honor the courage, perseverance, and resilience of Ukraine's civil society, which, along with the bravery and prowess of the country's military forces are resisting a brutal war of aggression by the Putin regime. Russia's war sadly proves once again the axiom long advanced by democracy advocates that authoritarians who repress their own citizens are more likely to export their brutality. But one civil society activist put it this way, quote, Putin thought his army was facing the Ukrainian military, she said. He was unprepared, however, to also confront the Ukrainian people, end quote. Ask any of these civil combatants and they will tell you that Ukraine will prevail if they are given the means to resist and if the international community can sustain comprehensive sanctions that isolate Moscow and degrade its capabilities. You will hear from them, and we in turn will recognize their struggle, a struggle that will determine the future of the Ukrainian state and the future of a rules-based international order and democratic freedoms far beyond Ukraine's borders. To lead our panel discussion, it is my privilege to introduce Anne Applebaum. For this audience and for many others, Anne needs no introduction, but I am sure that, like Henry Kissinger, she would enjoy hearing it. I believe it is Anne who is fond of retelling this Brent Scowcroft introduction of the former Secretary of State. I thought I'd turn it against her. But unlike Dr. Kissinger, she is a proponent of a very different outcome for this war. Anne is a board member of the Endowment, a staff writer for The Atlantic, and a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian. She is also a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and the Agora Institute, where she co-directs ARENA, a program on disinformation and 21st century propaganda. A Washington Post columnist for 15 years and a former member of the editorial board, she has also worked as the foreign and deputy editor of The Spectator magazine in London, as the political editor of the Evening Standard, and as a columnist at Slate, as well as the Daily and Sunday Telegraph. All of this before lunch. From 1988 to 1991, she covered the collapse of communism as the Warsaw correspondent of The Economist magazine and the Independent newspaper. I would ask Anne and our awardees, Daria, Alexandra, Anna, and Natalia to come up for our panel discussion. Thank you.
So thank you very much. The exact Henry Kissinger quotation that he's meant to have said is, I may not need an introduction, but I so enjoy them. But anyway, let's move along quickly from that subject. Thank you all very much for being here. I am truly flattered to be on this panel with these four really extraordinary women, all of whom have dedicated their lives to making their country a better place. They are unique. They're all hardworking. I somewhat feel that this circumstance you're not seeing them as they normally are. So the last time I saw Natalia Gomez, she was wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet, and we were in Bucha interviewing people who had just experienced Russian occupation. So you have to imagine all of these elegant, seated ladies. In reality, they're people in action. They're doing things. They're running around, and they're people who are involved in all kinds of things. Being on panels is not what they normally do. But I'm going to use this opportunity to try and elicit from them some sense of how their lives have changed and how their organizations have changed since the war began. And then we'll move on to what they think the future will bring and how their activism and the networks that they've created will be useful in the post-war period in Ukraine. Maybe I'll start with a question to all four of you, which is, each of you has founded and run an unusual organization. So Daria Kaleniuk is the director of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, which is before the war was a national organization that has connected legal, media, and civic actors to shape Ukrainian anti-corruption legislation. They had a lot of successes. They changed the way that the corruption laws worked in Ukraine. They created open property registers, electronic asset declarations. So this is an organization that was very devoted to transparency, to openness, and to making the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian government work better. So Daria, could you start by telling me, given that background, how has your life changed since the war began, and how have you redirected the work of your organization?
Sure, thank you, Anne. Actually, a few days before war started, I figured out that there is a big fan of our work, and his name is Vladimir Putin. In his speech, which was a declaration of war, a very long speech, he mentioned every single reform we as an organization worked on in Ukraine and successfully achieved with the help of many reformers in Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament. National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, High Anti-Corruption Court, judicial reform, precisely the High Council of Justice, which is supposed to be reformed through the crucial role of foreign experts. So the president of Russia mentioned all these reforms and told that these are just civil society, NGOs in Ukraine controlled by America who are doing all these reforms. So he probably meant our organization. But nevertheless, what it indicates is one of the reasons why he decided to invade. And it also indicated to me, I listened to that speech, that there will be war against all people of Ukraine, and we have to get prepared as soon as possible. So we prepared our team. We split into different groups. Those who can do communication decided, okay, we'll do communication if war starts inside Ukraine. Those who can do international communication, international advocacy, decided well in advance that we will move outside of Ukraine. And I'm in this group. So I have relocated, and jointly with other civil society, women leaders all across Ukraine, different organizations, we have founded the International Center of Ukrainian Victory in Warsaw. And since the second day of war, we are advocating for everything Ukraine needs internationally to win this war. Because actually, it doesn't make sense to fight corruption if you don't have a country, right? First, we need to have a country. And our fight is now for Ukrainian victory and for the victory of democracy.
So you were able to, you had a network, you had an organization, you had people with expertise and specialties, and you were able to turn that really quickly to do something different.
Absolutely different, yeah. So we have expertise in how to communicate in English. We have a network of people who trust us in the US, in other countries. Usually people got used to myself to being an anti-corruption person who is criticizing government. From the first day of invasion, I'm at the same side of our government and our president and our parliament and our prime minister. So we are all in the same boat. And I started to dig in what weapons we need. I started to dig in what is the Marshall Plan, how to reconstruct Ukraine. We started to talk to different experts on the ground in Poland and also to international audience to build the plan and to think what is a Ukrainian victory. Because at that moment, right after war broke up, it was hard to focus in Ukraine when you were sitting in basement about the future, about strategic victory. And we were able to do that because we already had this a very good network of people. And especially I want to thank Katarzyna Pisarska from Kazimir Pulaski Foundation. She's founder of Forces Security Forum. She's our angel, and it's also the example of the cooperation between Poland and Ukraine, Polish organizations and Ukrainian organizations. When in the hard time of war, we are working together. Thank you.
Thanks. So the Center for Civil Liberties is one of Ukraine's leading human rights organizations, founded in 2007. It develops legislative changes, a little bit like the Anti-Corruption Action Center. It's been very involved in writing new laws, changing the way the judiciary works, running civic education programs, also working internationally with other similar kinds of groups abroad. Alexandra Matvichuk is the chairwoman of that organization. And maybe, Alexandra, I can ask you the same question, which is, you were very focused as an organization on internal change inside Ukraine, on changing the way the judiciary works, changing the way people understand and think about civil liberties. What have you done since the war started, and how have you changed what you and your organization does?
This war started not in February 2022, but in 2014. So for all these 8 years, our organization worked on two strategic directions. First, we tried to help to create sustainable democratic institution in our country. And second important direction, we documenting war crimes in occupied Crimea and Donbass, and help the victims of war crimes and political persecutions. But our life rapidly changed after the large-scale Russian invasion. I remember very well how our partners asked us to evacuate from Kiev because it was a very dangerous moment. Russian troops circled Kiev, tried to circle it completely, but we decided to stay and to continue our work from the ground. And we united several hundreds of volunteers throughout the country to document war crimes. I always rely upon ordinary people, and I strongly believe that if you want to be successful, you have to ingrain ordinary people into human rights work. And now, with the assistance of ordinary people, we are able very quickly to provide response to the atrocities which we're recording, and to help victims of these atrocities. Unfortunately, in our work, we couldn't rely upon legal instrument, because for current moment, Russia don't fulfill any human standards, any norms of international humanitarian law, any decision of UN system. But we always can rely upon solidarity, on courage of ordinary people, on resistance of Ukrainian nation. And the experience that you'd had in the past working with Ukrainian judges, with Ukrainian lawyers, how has that helped you now? I know that you're working on the issues of human rights violations now, documenting war crimes. How does your past experience help you in the present? For current moment, we documented thousands of cases when Russia deliberately shelling different civil objects like schools, kindergartens, residential buildings, drama theaters, like how Russia destroyed critical infrastructure facilities, how Russia committed different offenses against civilian people like murder, abduction, torture, rapes, and so on. And now I understand that we are working not only on legal level, but on symbolical level. Because what Putin tried to perceive the whole Ukrainian nation and other countries as well, he tried to convince us that values in which we rely upon, it's artificial, that democracy, rule of law, human rights is not exist at all, because you couldn't rely on this value during this war. He tried to convince us that only force is matter. And that's why our human rights work is very essential, because we work for future, restoring legal order, because justice may be delayed, but couldn't be denied.
Natalia, the first time I met you, you were working for Hromadski, which was a public interest television station that was set up around the time of the Maidan, just before it, if I recall. You're now running the Public Interest Journalism Lab, which is a little bit more than just a news organization. I know that it relies on other kinds of, the idea is not just to report the news, but also to promote constructive discussion and debate. Tell us a little bit about how that kind of work is useful now and how it helps you write and think about the war, and how your organization is coping in new circumstances. I know because of our mutual friend that you are doing a big project that involves people all across Ukraine, documenting human rights violations, but also figuring out how to tell the stories about them in a way that draws people in. So maybe you could describe that a little bit.
Trying to be brief, indeed, there was quite a long way also for the Ukrainian independent journalism, but I think Ukraine can be, just set aside the whole world. So for the last couple of years, we really were a bit puzzled by the idea of the polarization in the societies, that it's usually misused by the regimes, by the dictators, and it's not just about the independent media, telling what the people should do. It's probably finding out how we have a constructive discussion over complex issues. That was the reason why we founded the organization. And what was just given the hint that on the 23rd of February, we were presenting the research which we've done probably for half a year. We've been looking, our focus group with our colleagues, we were looking at the public opinion in the occupied Donbass. In particularly on the opportunity, how we can engage those people. Of course, a very discrete work, which our colleagues from Kharkiv Institute for Social Research were doing. And on the 24th, we were about to present it not just to the civil society in Ukraine and other media, but also to the government officials. I may say that maybe that work could be thrown to the garbage, but I definitely would say not, because we can, for history, record that there was an opportunity to engagement, and there was a will, and there was no pretext for this war if you really look on the human level. But of course, after the war started, we really need to, bring again our bulletproof vests. In my organization, a lot of us, we are the ones who were, focused so much in 2014 and 2015 in the conflict in the Donbass and Crimea, and with those who really said, without, sorting out those issues, without forgetting content, there is no other model than, dealing with the hard issues as well, apart from just building the media, as if those things, even though they are unpopular and there is some fatigue over those topics.
Right. So to be clear, Natalia was a war correspondent before the war. She spent a lot of time in the Donbass area and in Crimea.
So then, of course, we started a lot to report within this last 100 days more. I've been myself with the team. I think like in every single region, apart from the places which are currently occupied, talking to numerous people. And indeed, we're now building one of the projects on documenting possible crimes against humanity, war crimes, but also bringing the people from all over the country, bringing the journalists from Kharkiv, Kherson, Severodonetsk, really strong personalities. Some of them been detained and tortured. 5 of them had lost their flats by chance, just saying that in Kharkiv, in Chernihiv, in Irpin. That's how I just should explain the life of the journalist today. One spent time 2 weeks in the basement in Bucha, and luckily we managed to save him. So we go around the country, we talk to the people, we're looking for the testimonies to also build the cases for with coalitions in cooperation in order to justice would be served, but also very importantly that there would be some narrative understanding that those crimes are connected. The crimes of Russia did in Chechnya, in Syria, they are usually done by the very same people, like really literally the very same people, for all these 30 years. And Ukraine gives the chance for this, for justice if we work hard. But just one thing to do, what we else do, also with the support of Ned, but a lot of others. I should also say, I don't want Ukraine to be associated just with the war crimes and the crimes against humanity. What we also do, we do just report what this war is for Ukrainian, to show, this bright in the end of the tunnel, because I don't want my team be fully, into this idea that things are horrible. They're very horrible, but also it makes a help because we're meeting all the time the people by whom we inspired all over the country. And that's also the story to be told. I was reporting for many years for the Ukrainian audience, and that was, my main thing. I didn't want to write so much for international media. So there is a Ukrainian audience to be served. There are so many international media globally. But now we also do both, because I also think that despite all the great job is done, there is something Ukrainians need to say. We can't do this cliche war. This war is very similar to a lot of other wars, but it's also very unique. And there are things, it's not just about the compassion to Ukraine, it's also about being inspired by Ukraine, and that's what we're also trying to do.
One thing that you said to me, and this was the subject of an article that you wrote that I think this audience would find interesting. You talked to me about how the fact that Ukraine is a democracy means that the Ukrainians are fighting in a different way. That it's, and that the fight between Russia and Ukraine is not just a fight between nations, but it is really a fight between systems, and this is something that you can see.
Clearly, yes. And that's really, I think, should be the focus. I think that, first of all, it's all kind of the networks. I think Ukraine fights and Ukrainian society is also that solid because it's a bit like a puzzle. I see the incredible cooperation between the government and civil society, and the religious community and non-religious people. And it works exactly because it is the cooperation. Because you need to have a volunteer and a governor and a military, but also a professionals to fix the water pipeline in Chernihiv and serve the people. You really can't make it alone, and I think Ukrainians understand it a lot. Also, because I think that there is a great admiration globally by the President Zelensky, and it's very important what he does, but also it can't be overlooked how much things are done on the ground. And not because he doesn't care about the ground. This war in such a large country won't be won if Ukraine won't be decentralized. So in every country, you don't need to expect that Kiev and Bankova tell the people somewhere in Donetsk region what to do. There would be the local mayor and the local activist, and they would come together, and they would be from different political affiliations, but they would work together. But on the systems, I think what is also very tragic, and probably we would go on with that for the life of the newly occupied territories. What I understand that often when the Russians come into those villages, they don't really understand that people are consciously doing what they're doing, that they don't need to be told that the local villagers' head, which was elected, really represents the community and represents himself, and he's not the SBU agent, and if he's loyal to Ukrainian state. So they try to ask them the question, who are organizers of those protests? And they genuinely do not believe that there are or there could be locals. It puts a lot of Ukrainians at risk, but also without even if for the moment Kiev is busy with other things, or the governor is busy with other things, people on the ground do their job without being told. That's something what Russians don't comprehend. I mean, speaking about the Russians, which make it very vital, but Ukraine really signifies them for them something totally different, which they truly do not understand, I'm afraid.
This is what's always struck me about Putin. Famously, in 2011, when there were protests in Moscow, his first reaction was, Hillary Clinton has organized them. To which my reaction was, I wish Hillary Clinton could organize protests in Moscow, but I don't think that's possible. But there is this kind of KGB mentality where you can't see anything spontaneous as being spontaneous. Some foreign agent or somebody has always had to organize it. The fourth organization that's being honored is the Ukrainian Volunteer Service. That was established in 2017 to foster a culture of volunteerism across the country. UVS trains civic activists to build public-private partnerships to promote sustainable activism. It's a network. It's got over 500 organizations in its community, and more than 3,000 activists have graduated from its training programs. Anna Bondarenko is the founder and chief executive of the Ukrainian Volunteer Service. Anna, maybe you could also answer the same question. So how have you mobilized your resources? How have you taken your experience, and how have you put it to use in the last 3 months?
So for us, 105 days ago, our team woke up at 5 a.m. to the sound of explosions. And our team is located all around the country. We have team members who are located on the west, on the south, on the east. And at 5 a.m. in our chat with some messages that, okay, so it all started. We need to do something. And already at 8 a.m., we already started working. So we set up a system of coordination. We started to write and call to our partner organizations, to kind of check what everybody is doing. We set up a chat bot to receive requests from people for help, and we already started to receive requests for evacuation, for some support, and just people trying to get some information, what's actually going on. And frankly speaking, I don't remember first several weeks very well, because for now it feels like it was just one really long day, because as we started working at 8 a.m. that first day, we actually started to run without any breaks, and we are running in this on this speed actually right now. What is really interesting is that for us, as an organization that has been working for 5 years, and our goal all these 4 years was to promote the culture of volunteering, in which every single person will have an opportunity to volunteer, to help, to develop himself or herself through volunteering. So before February 24, we've been really focused on working locally in small cities, in villages, to engage those people in volunteering. And then on February 24, we just became one of the organizations everybody was trying to reach, because we knew what to do. So they were asking us, okay, I'm 24-year-old, I'm an IT guy from Lviv, what can I do? Hello, I'm a teenager girl from Okhtirka, what can I do? Hello, I'm like a 34-year-old accountant. How can I be helpful? And we started, to coordinate those people and to match those people with the organizations we trust. And we trust and we know a lot of many organizations who are working both nationally and locally. The one thing that is interesting is that since February 24, we've been able to mobilize 100,000 volunteers all around the country. And those were so many different people. Again, teenagers, students, professionals in their mid-careers. All those people just wanted to do something in order to, first of all, to react and to respond, and then also, to help the people who are in need. And during those 100 days, we saw, how those people, they were actually learning how to volunteer in an effective manner. Because, like in the first weeks, we saw everybody just running and doing everything, evacuation, humanitarian help, providing food and stuff. And then we saw this amazing moment when those people, they kind of started, to move from just reacting to the situation to actually, making these little coalitions on a local level, making those local NGOs, fundraising money, and distributing them to people in need. And we saw how everybody was actually, finding their own spot on this big map and big system, and, and being effective in this spot. And that is something that really, just now we are starting to feel and see how amazing it was, because at that moment, at the beginning, we were just doing stuff. We were not thinking a lot, But for now, we are seeing how the whole Ukrainian nation, at some point, turned to volunteer. So we as an organization, we didn't have to explain why volunteering is important. We had to tell people what to do, where to do, and whom to trust in order to be efficient. And just one other thing that I'm thinking a lot lately is how civil society organizations were really fast in reacting to this full-scale war, because during the first 3 days, we've been able to get in touch with the biggest organizations who are working, in the humanitarian sector, in helping veterans and helping internally displaced person, and we were just on the same page. So there were no like misunderstanding. There were no, I don't know, some, conversations, how to do it, what to do. We just we're talking, we're uniting, and really fast, going and doing stuff together. And that is something that is really nice to think about right now. And that is something that actually made us really strong on those first weeks when we didn't know how the situation will turn. We were expecting different ways of how this can go, but we just reacted on that.
And how do you have donors who were able to help you or advise? I mean, how were you, or were you working directly with the government? I mean, how did you know, when the 32-year-old accountant pulled up and said, I want to do something, how did you know where to send him?
So basically, for us, we were actually really lucky to be in this sphere before the full-scale invasion, because when it started, we had just to mobilize our resources and not to build it from scratch. So we were being in touch with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, because we are a partner of the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and we've been able to stay in touch with the biggest organizations. So we just, we were the ones who actually called and started to ask, so how can we help? We have those thousands of people. How can we help? What can we do? What money do you need? What people do you need? What skills do you need? And we just started to monitor all of that, and then trying to find, this perfect match between people who want to help and have some skills, knowledge, resources, contacts, and stuff, and organizations who actually knew what to do, but sometimes, and especially during the first weeks, they just had a lack of time. They were just, working, and they needed those additional hands. Just one story that I want to recall. It was one of the first days of the war, when the situation in Kiev was pretty intense. We had Russian troops all around Kiev, and we got a call from the Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Health asked us, hey, do you have a volunteer who is ready right now, a driver with a car, who is ready to go to Kiev Oblast to get the drugs for people who are fighting cancer, and just to move it from Kiev Oblast to Kiev, because we are expecting this city to be taken by Russians. So we thought, okay, we can do it. And in 2 hours, the volunteer from Kiev went to that city, took all of the drugs for the cancer, for the people with cancer, brought it back to Kiev to a safer spot. And then in 3 hours afterwards, we have learned that the Russians had taken the city. So we've had thousands of those stories, but this one is something that reminds me, how important it is to be at the correct time, in the correct place. And sometimes you don't have to be some superhero. You don't have to have those, skills and master's degree from top universities. You just have to be on the right time at the right place. And that is something that we were trying to do, and that is something that we continue to do right now, because we are seeing that the dynamics in Ukraine had changed. So we still do need lots of volunteers, and we do have this enormous unity among Ukrainians. But actually right now, the dynamics has changed in a way that we need people to volunteer not only fast, but volunteer smart. We have many volunteers who are right now staying in the occupied territories of Kherson Oblast, Zaporizhia Oblast. They're not leaving, they're being there in the occupation, and they're still volunteering and helping people in need, even though it is completely not safe for them to do that. But it's their choice to stay and not to leave, and to be there and to help, and to live through occupation and to save people while the Russian troops are there.
One of the things I wanted to ask all of you about actually was whether you're able to work in the occupied territories. Oh, sorry. Sorry, one of the things I wanted to ask all of you was whether you're able to work in the occupied territories, and and how does that function? Maybe Daria.
We work with people who evacuated from occupied territories, and we are trying to help them to tell the world in English what's happening there. Mm-hmm. And we are trying to explain to the world that occupied territories are not just territories. These are hundreds, thousands of people. And when there are geopolitical discussions, including with participation of Dr. Kissinger, who was mentioned earlier today, these discussions are about the fate of hundreds, thousands, and millions of people in Ukraine. We are not giving up on our people. And I see that at least my role, the role of our organization, is to remind that these territories are actually people, not territories, and we have to liberate them.
So that's a communications. Alexandra, what are you all able to work there? Are you able to reach people there?
Every day we received information about different kinds of offenses which committed in occupied territories. And this is, frankly speaking, a very frustration moment for us because we can do nothing to stop this to commit. And we're recording it for future justice, but parallel, we think what we can do in order to prevent these war crimes, in order to prevent new abductions, murders, and killings to occur. And this is a very challengeable question for me as a human rights lawyer, not only as, and it's challengeable not only for Ukraine, but for the whole world, because it's very dangerous to live in the world where you couldn't rely upon on any legal instrument when you are in such kind of situation. But I will be very honest, there is two things which surprised me very much during these three months. First, we gathered testimonies of people from Kiev region before this region were liberated. Because like now from Kherson or Zaporizhia region or Kharkiv region or Lugansk-Donetsk region, we obtained information about human rights violations and war crimes which is committed there. And I remember the story of a woman whose husband were killed when he go to the center in Bucha together with his son. And he was stopped by Russian soldiers. He immediately stopped. He raised his hand and said, "We are civilians." And it was very obvious that they are civilians. It was father and son. But Russian soldiers start shooting them in a close range, and they killed this father and severely injured the son. But the son survived, and these women provide us the story before the liberation of Bucha. But we was in completely shock when our mobiles groups came to work on the spot. Because when it's become possible for civilians to come to Bucha, Matyzhin, Vorzel, Irpin, we sent our mobiles groups to work on the ground. And when our members of mobile groups saw in their own eyes the dead bodies who lay scattered around the streets with the hands tied under their back. It's completely different when you hear the story and when you become a witness of the story. And second, what shocked me and surprised me, we were prepared based on our past experience for deliberate persecution of active people around the country. Because we worked for years in Crimea and Donbass, and we remember very well how pro-Russian troops and so-called de facto authorities in Crimea started deliberate persecution of human rights defenders, journalists, volunteers, any active people who can organize peaceful resistance, including priests, including art leaders, including representatives of local authorities, etc. So their plan was to deliberately liquidate active minority and to send a message to majority to be calm in order to save the control over the region. But I was completely unprepared that Russians start not political persecution, but a terror against civilians. And this is a huge difference, because political persecutions, okay, it's a violation of international humanitarian law, it's cruel, but have some rational meaning, because they try to stop the activities of some concrete people, but they organize a terror in Bucha. They kill everybody whom they want to kill, only because they can. And this is something different, which is under beyond any legal and moral frame. They killed unarmed people. They provide no distinction whether they are human rights defenders or like ordinary farmer. We never leave alone our people in occupied territories. We will never
provide them a destiny to survive under Russian terror. We will fight for the liberation of Ukrainian territory, and we will win soon or later.
Natalia, can you report from the occupied territories?
Just last week, I came back from Kryvyi, which is not occupied, but which is an hour drive from the occupied Kherson. Just in this town, there are 40,000 people living currently who came from Kherson. So when you go to any community center or anywhere and basically talk to any single person, there is any incredible story behind that. When I came to the liberated villages, I would say that in every of them, I've seen the story about a person being killed or person being tortured, and I wish nobody's seen those pictures of what happened to those people. So technically, you're not able to work. You're really not able, because neither the volunteers, neither the independent volunteers are really currently allowed, maybe some locals. But it's possible to work. In Kherson region itself, there is more than 1 million people living. And if in one town you have 40,000, there is, because sometimes I hear from the journalists, do you have a verified information? There is loads and loads of verified information. In Kherson region, out of there are 49 kind of districts. 35 of the heads of the regional districts were for some time abducted, detained. Some of them are freed, but all of them most of them are staying in touch with their communities due different means. So we cannot tell that we don't know. We really know it's possible. We know that there is the issues with the mobile connection and other things, but as I said, Anna told about her volunteers. It's really possible to tell this story. And something else to add, I remember there were a couple headlines also in Ukrainian international media, and now we learned about Bucha, after we learned about Bucha. We were working, my colleague closely spent time in Irpin, waiting the refugees and people coming from early March. Everything they said everything what was happening there, really everything. There was, of course, we thought that maybe they're a bit overdoing. Sometimes maybe people, show things that they are worst. And then we understood that no, we knew the things. There was nothing surprised for us. That's why my message today would be that we know what's happening in the occupied territories now. We have enough of verified data. Even from Russia, even about those people deported to Russia, it's possible to talk to them. It's possible to find those who moved to the Baltics or elsewhere. So it is possible to tell the story. It's really not a moment to say we do not know yet. Mm-hmm. We definitely know. I'm in touch with the people in Crimea who are really crying. I know crying was one thing. They said, we don't want to leave. We see that our Bakhchisarai, a Crimean Tatar stronghold, is basically the military base, and we can do anything because we see him from our city. The planes are flying and the rockets are flying to kill, the Ukrainians. But I think that it's possible. Technically, if you're not really present, we have enough of data to tell this story.
So you can work in the occupied territories. You can figure out what's going on. You can advocate on behalf of the people who live there. And you can begin to prepare the grounds for some kind of justice that will be done after the war. That's what the four of you have just said. Let me conclude the panel by asking each one of you to throw this story forward a little bit, to talk about how we've talked about how you've changed what you do and how your experiences in the past helped you with this moment, helped you to deal with the war. How are you beginning to think about after the war? Daria, I know that you're asked quite often as a former expert in corruption and anti-corruption, how will we prevent Ukraine from falling into some bad habits after the war? How are we fighting corruption now and in the future? I know you're asked that a lot, but I'm wondering if you could share with this audience your thoughts about how Ukraine can and will be different or could be different, and how you and your organization will push that in that direction.
Well, in Ukraine, you're saying not after the war, after victory.
After victory.
Yeah. But it's also important to understand what is victory. Yeah. And complete victory for us means also making different Ukraine. Ukraine is part of the EU family. Mm-hmm. And moving forward to the EU membership, making all the reforms needed for that, it will be our future. And this is what I hope to do and focus on after Russian troops will leave all Ukrainian sovereign territory. But first, we have to work all together to make sure that all our territories are liberated and all our people are freed. That's number one priority. And whether we will be able to have different Ukraine, I'm convinced in that. After victory, Ukraine will be much stronger. And now, civil society is everyone in Ukraine. Everyone, as Anna explained on the very precise examples, found its small task to do in order to help Ukraine win. It's important that after victory, everyone in Ukraine remembers that he or she has to find a small task to do to rebuild Ukraine and to make Ukraine a better place to live. It will be not easy. It will be hard. But we will remember always what is the cost to live in the free country, in a democracy, where there are different political parties which can fight each other, but they are fighting in the democracy. It's cool to have fighting in the democracy between politicians because we can choose. And we will remember that freedom is not granted, democracy is not granted, and every single person has to find its way. And in terms of my background, anti-corruption, I've received a lot of questions. How is corruption doing now in Ukraine? And
I've seen you answer the questions on Twitter. That's why I asked you.
Yes. Thank you for following my Twitter. Those who are not following yet, please, you're welcome. In Ukraine, corruption is everywhere, always, in every country in the world. Mm-hmm. And you can't say that in Ukraine there is no corruption. But in Ukraine, there is understanding that if you are stealing from army, just average people will simply eat you. Because there is so much trust to the army and so much support for the army to be able to deliver results and to be able to fight for our freedom. And I think that it's important to see what will be the news from the EU soon. We hope for the EU candidacy status to be granted in the coming weeks. For all Ukrainians, it will be the sign of hope that we have a very bright future. And it will be a roadmap for us to fight for the reforms which we need to do, including important anti-corruption reforms and rule of law reforms.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Alexandra, you've worked so much on the Ukrainian justice system and on Ukrainian civil rights. How are you thinking about what to do after victory? How will your organization change? What is it that you're going to be working for?
It's a very obvious task for us. We have to continue what we started several years ago. I mean, during the Revolution of Dignity. Because during the Revolution of Dignity, we are fighting for our democratic choice, for a right to have a chance, at least a chance, to build a country where everyone's rights are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And then, when we win and obtain a new task for ourselves, because now we have to do it, and Ukraine obtain a chance to provide a quick democratic transformation after the collapse of authoritarian regime, Putin started this war in 2014 with occupation of Crimea and hybrid war in the Donbas. Because Putin is afraid not of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. And what victory for us? Victory for us is not only to repeal Russian troops from Ukraine, but to complete this democratic transformation, to build sustainable democratic institutions, and to escape from the zone of transition in which we, as Ukrainians, are stuck for decades. And I see that I can provide essential input in this process. And what makes me optimistic? I'm optimist, and I look in future with optimism. I don't see it's easy, it will be difficult, but still. I rely on the traditional of Soviet dissident, as well as my own experience, because during Revolution of Dignity, I coordinated civil initiative Euromaidan SOS, and we provided assistance to the whole persecuted protesters around the country. And every day, we worked 24 hours a day, and hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, who were persecuted, who were arrested, who were accused in fabricated criminal cases passed through our care. And on that moment, we faced with the whole authoritarian state machine. Like paramilitary group Titushki cooperate with prosecutors, prosecutors cooperate with judges, the president, the government, the majority of parliament were against peaceful protests. They tried to liquidate us, even physically. And in this situation, it was very easy to say, okay, what I can do as a human rights lawyer? The law does not exist at all, and stop fighting. But because our lawyers and our volunteers fight very honestly for each person, for each protesters, for each procedural measures, we started to work not on a legal level, but on symbolical level. What do I mean? Everybody knows, and now maybe we are in the same situation, because now we have to compete another authoritarian state machine, Putin's state machine. And we face with the so-called the second large and powerful army in the world. But Ukrainian nation is much more powerful than any army. But still, there is no guarantee. You can be killed. You can be abducted. You can be arrested. You can be beaten. But for the days during the Revolution of Dignity and now, people know that there are another people who will fight for them, who will never let them alone, who will do everything to help. And this provides a courage to overcome the fear and to continue resistance. The key issue is human solidarity.
Anna, will the spirit of Ukrainian volunteerism survive the war, and how will you make use of it afterwards? In the last few minutes we have left, briefly.
Well, I personally believe that democracy is built within the country, and I personally believe that democracy is built not by reading books or some newspapers. Democracy is built by practicing it. So what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, those thousands of volunteering, they are learning democracy by doing. And that is something that inspires me a lot. And I'm sure that this is something that will be deepening and deepening while this war goes on and after our victory. And I truly believe that with international support, which is tremendous and which is really important, Ukrainian civil society can turn not into just, some small society. It can turn into the whole country as it is right now, like in order to fight the war, but also after the victory, we will fight not against someone, but we will fight for something, for a better Ukraine, for more just Ukraine, for Ukraine we know and we love in order to rebuild it. And that actually takes the whole Ukraine nation and every single Ukrainian to build the country. So yeah, we'll have a lot of work to do.
De Tocqueville, when he visited America in the 19th century, observed that Americans participated in associations. And he described this at that time as the secret of American democracy, because Americans practice democracy in each one of these little organizations. So the same could be true in Ukraine. Natalia, I'm going to give you the last word on the future of Ukrainian media and how that will be different.
But I still want to say that I like, as somebody who is just conveying messages of the others about this, there is a message to convey. I asked the very same question of the guy who is a worker at the steel plant in Vervier, who is 43, by the way. You know, like he born in his late 70s, and he said, like, now we need to work hard in order to win. And by the way, earlier we maybe worked just for our family, but now I understand we need to work for our plant, and then to work for our city, and then for our country, and maybe for the globe. And you know what? I didn't expect this political thinking of the guy. And then he said, like, yes, so that's what we need to do now for the victory. And then after the victory, we need to work even harder to make it even better, and Ukraine make it better. So that would be my statement from the ordinary worker. I think that these people give us also the clear vision to where the Ukrainian media should go. Because I've been looking a lot at the Ukrainian society with all these flows, problems, polarization. But I should also say I didn't understand how diverse it is, how multiple communities are represented. And a lot of the question I often ask now by the people who are coming back from to Kiev, foreign experts, ambassadors, whether the Ukraine would be back to its ugly political fights. And I say, like, we were afraid from ugly political fights with the reason that maybe they would make Ukraine weak in the moment of crisis. Somehow we managed to be very much okay and be united at the moment of probably the worst crisis Ukraine lives through the last 30 years. So if there would be political fights, that would be very good. Very much okay. I want them back. I want this normal spirit of pluralism be back, and I'm truly, truly believe it, because I would just sign everything Anna said. I saw myself, I'm not a sociologist, but talking to 100 people, that so many people experienced this democracy, pluralism now, so that they won't give it back. And the role of our media, of course, we would do a lot about justice and anti-corruption and accountability, but maybe something else. Let me just, I know I'm taking time, but I also think it wasn't really mentioned. Of course, I'm very concerned about the economical situation, because often I'm asked, what as independent journalist I need now? I want the bridge to be built between Chernihiv and Sedny. I want the hospital be rebuilt. I think that's the best what could be done to our society. And that is absolute. I want those people have the places to work. And then we can do everything else. So this also should be because it gives also the purpose and the vision of the future.
So let's hear a round of applause for 4 really amazing women. These people and many like them are the ones who are going to win the war and rebuild Ukraine. So thank you very much. Thanks. And I'll turn this now back to Ken.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you all. Madeleine Albright, when she was Secretary of State, described Ukraine along with Indonesia, Colombia, and Nigeria as one of 4 of the most important countries in the world. She also described herself as an optimist, but an optimist who worries a lot. And I think that describes all of you. And I hope after victory that at least some of you will consider entering politics, because politics in Ukraine also need your talent. There is no one more appropriate to lead our award presentations than Ambassador Milan Vervier, another member of the Endowment Board of Directors. Milan is well known in Ukraine and among our awardees as an American leader who, over 2 decades, has been committed to and engaged in Ukraine's democratic path. It's personal for Milan. She has also been at the forefront of most Ukrainian and global efforts to advance women's empowerment. As the State Department's first ambassador at large for global women's issues, the U.S. representative to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the founding chair of Vital Voices, and now is director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. It is my privilege to turn over our ceremony to Ambassador Vervier. Madeleine.
Thank you, Ken. I am going to postpone the brief remarks I wanted to make because Senator Risch is with us to present awards. He has to go and confront some votes very shortly, so we're going to go right into his presentation. Senator Risch represents the state of Idaho. He's the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and an extraordinarily strong supporter of Ukraine and Ukraine's democracy. At a previous Democracy Awards event, he said, "We must never forget that the work of democracy is never finished. It is ongoing work, a constant adjustment in changing times." The words that he gave at another Ned Awards event several years ago, these words are just as appropriate for today. So Senator Risch, if you could come forward and start the awards presentation.
Well, Ambassador, thank you. I enjoyed hearing your description where I will confront the votes. That's never thought of it that way, but it's certainly an accurate description.
It will always be a challenge.
Well, thank you for inviting me here today. Before I haven't had a chance to rehearse all this because I've been busy all day, so this might be a little less smooth than it should be. But I after listening to the things that were said here, I would like to say a couple of words. As you've noted, I've been outspoken about the Ukrainian situation for some time, and I feel strongly about it. And I'd like to make a couple of observations if I can. One of the things that has struck me, and I meet with the ambassador and other Ukrainians regularly, mostly women for obvious reasons these days, but nonetheless, I've been so impressed with their commitment to the cause that they're going through right now. And one of the things that has struck me and really hasn't made its way into the popular press very much is what's going on here. This isn't the regular run-of-the-mill war that we confront regularly in our business. We see these going on all over the globe where two countries are fighting. This is a struggle for freedom. This is, in my judgment, exactly what the United States of America went through in 1776. Now, admittedly, the adversaries were different than the adversaries here, but nonetheless, it was a struggle for a people to say, look, we are not going to live under an authoritarian government. And that's what's going on here. And I have been struck as I've met with you, Madam Ambassador, and others from Ukraine about how committed to that they are. They don't articulate it the same way, but they believe the same thing. They're fighting for the same thing. And my view of this is that it's going to be different than other wars in that when this is over, what's happened here will become a part of the fabric of Ukraine. The freedoms that the Ukrainians have obtained for themselves are going to be woven into that fabric, never to be given up. They will always remember what they went through. They'll always remember the hardship and the adversarial things that they had to do to gain their freedom. But it will never be given up, and it will never be given away. And understand just as Americans understand, and other countries who've had to go through this, that freedom isn't free, and that it's there to be hung on to if you can, and only will you hang on to it if you continue to make the sacrifice. It's going to be an ongoing sacrifice. The only bad news I have for you is, don't expect this to be pretty when it's over. Democracy is not pretty. It is not smooth. It is not easygoing. It is a constant tug of war. But the fact that you have differences, which we always do within democracies, really adds to the strength of the freedom and the democracy of the people. The important thing is, how do you resolve those differences? And how you resolve those differences is what makes a difference between what you're fighting for, what we already have here in America, and what the unfortunate people who live in the Soviet countries and other countries that are not free, authoritarian governments have. They don't have the ability to resolve their differences like we free people do. So God bless you for what you're doing. We're there, and we're going to continue to stand by you. Well, I'm here. Thank you for having me here. Again, not my first trip here. I'm a huge proponent, as you know, of the work being done by Ned and his partner organizations to promote freedom and democracy worldwide. I'm especially heartened to see all that you're doing to support the Ukrainian people. Civil society groups are critical to any healthy democracy, and we see that here today with the honorees that you have chosen. Even before Russia invaded Ukraine, again in February, civil society in Ukraine was key in pushing reforms, building a new Ukrainian society and improving every area of life in Ukraine. I believe the Ukrainians know that a free people cannot live with corruption. When there is corruption, it has to be fought at every turn, and you can't have a free society. You can't have a government or a society that people will believe in if you have corruption. And I've been struck by the interest that the Ukrainians have had at working at this constantly, and it's going to rear its ugly head again after this is over, as you referred to, and I hope you will commit yourselves to stamping that out as you go forward. In the 105 days since the invasion, Ukraine's civil society has become ever more important. Ukrainian journalists like Natalia Gomez and the Public Interest Journalism Lab are keeping both the Ukrainian public informed about their terrible new reality and recording the horrors of this war for posterity. And we all know that with the horrors that are going on, when this is over, when the shooting stops, it's not over. There has got to be accountability. Human rights defenders like the Center for Civil Liberties are needed more than ever in Ukraine. The abuses and crimes of Russian invaders must not go unpunished, and those Ukrainians who have suffered need advocates like Oksana Matvichuk to work for them. Even amid the fog of war, Ukraine must not lose sight of its ongoing battle against corruption, as I said. The end of this war will give Ukrainians an excellent chance to rebuild a new, corrupt-free society, and I hope ANTAC will take a leading role in formulating those changes. As this war continues, my colleagues in the Senate and I will continue to support the government and people of Ukraine and the work that tonight's honorees do. So it's now my pleasure to turn to the reason we're here and all gathered here this evening, and that is the presentation of the 2022 Democracy Awards. The first award honors the work of an innovative organization that has brought together journalists with sociologists to develop more effective ways of telling important stories and discussing difficult topics through public interest reporting. The Public Interest Journalism Lab, founded in 2020 by Ukrainian journalists Natalia Gomez and Angelina Karyanin, and I apologize for butchering the words. I'm not good at the Ukrainian names. I apologize. has been working in cooperation with Johns Hopkins University, the Kharkiv Institute for Social Research, and Lviv Media Forum to conduct research and share best practices with other journalists on tough subjects, including conspiratorial propaganda, the coronavirus pandemic, and overcoming polarization. On February 24th, the lab knew that the focus of their work had to change overnight. Drawing upon her many years as a war correspondent in Ukraine's East, in the Donbass, and in the Crimea, Natalia and her colleagues turned the lab into a frontline media production company. Since the first day of Russia's attacks on Ukraine, IPJL was provided invaluable reporting and documentation to major international media outlets. Natalia herself has written many hard-hitting pieces for the Washington Post, the Guardian, and the Atlantic, to name just a few. The lab is also using its cameras, recorders, and pens to collect evidence of war crimes and also to create oral histories from ordinary Ukrainians to preserve collective memory, even as Vladimir Putin seeks to erase it. Please join me to watch a brief video about the Public Interest Journal Lab and its co-founder. So, are we ready?
I'm Natalia Gumenyuk. I'm a Ukrainian journalist. I'm co-founder and the director of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. We worked a lot with the conflict. So there was always the stress on what's happening in Crimea and in particular in the Donbass. So since the first day of the war, of course, I do work using my background as a war correspondent, as a conflict reporter, basically to be on the ground. And now I understood that was the only way. So we very fast, of course, regrouped and more or less started to work as a production, which was producing the content for international and Ukrainian media.
Уже по них навіть проведені експертизи.
PIGL is also working on the projects on documenting the testimonies about the possible war crimes or crimes against humanity, but also the oral history of the country. Now it's a very dire time for the Ukrainian journalism, but it happened we are still a group of people who can collaborate, find a car, go together to the Donbass. And I also like it because I know there are a lot of a great organization in Ukraine who are trying to do something, but I also like this kind of self-organizational thing, when people act as the community, not because it's a part of the task, but just because it should be like that. There is something happening now. There is a moment to learn your country, because sometimes people need to show who they are in the worst moment. And that's where things are happening. Going around the country and seeing the people there is such an inspiration. The volunteers, the local mayors, doctors who are staying in the hospitals despite of everything and saving people. I'm honestly inspired by so many people. But serving communities, helping them, enabling them, giving them voice, and creating the space for constructive discussion for the future, that would be for me the biggest mission. The future of the Ukrainian journalism very much depends on how do we act now. Ukrainians, they're fighting for Ukraine, but they in fact fighting for the values. They need solidarity and support. It's not up to us alone to kind of consider what would be the future of Ukraine, but it's definitely our role to ask the people.
And it's my pleasure to ask Natalia to join me on the stage, and I'm going to present the award. Where's the award? Here it is.
Тяжка.
Now, I haven't been up here. They told me to look for the circle to stand on. Is that over here? Thank you.
Look at that. Over here, man. There you go.
Thank you very much, and congratulations.
I wonder if I'm supposed to tell something, because we are a bit, I've been so much of us here. Okay. First of all, I want to say that I'm very humbled to receive it on behalf of all the Ukrainian independent journalists. I understand it's not ours. But being super brief, I was struck when I came to this Ned office on Monday, when I saw this sign about the right to choose a destiny. Because now it's on the wall in the DC, but that's exactly what I heard from so many Ukrainians in the villages and towns that I was like, I can't comprehend. This is on the walls, and these are not just the words. 12 years ago, I've been explaining to a lot of Ukrainians why independent media matter. A week ago, when I was asked again, another worker at the steel plant, asking what makes Ukraine different from Russia, he said, freedom of speech. And I was like, really? Really, he does says it to me. So it was all not in vain. And it's not because Ukrainians are unique or there is something in our blood. I think it's a result of the hard work of all those years, of the, especially last 8 years, but of the generation of the journalists and societies. We lived through we discussed a lot about the crisis of the journalism today. And now we're recording the war crimes. And it's very dark. But I think that the darkest is before dawn. And I urge everybody to look at Ukraine today as an incredible chance, definitely not the last chance, but the very, very strong chance to understand that those words which are written in the walls here are really could be engraved not just in the Ukrainian society, but all over the place where people truly value that. Disregarding other Ukrainians, we all have this chance. So that's what we do. And thanks a lot again on behalf of all the Ukrainian journalists. And the democracy is not that heavy, I should say.
Our next Democracy Award honors the work of one of Ukraine's leading human rights organizations, the Center for Civil Liberties. Since its founding in 2007, the Center for Civil Liberties has monitored political prosecutions in occupied Crimea, documented war crimes and crimes against humanity during the hybrid war in Donbass, and organized international campaigns to release the Kremlin's political prisoners. After Russia's February 24th invasion, the center restarted its Euromaidan SOS campaign. Euromaidan SOS provided legal assistance to protesters and monitored abuses of the security forces of former President Viktor Yanukovych. Today, the initiative includes several hundred volunteers who are gathering civilians' testimonies of war crimes. With more than 10,000 allegations of Russian war crimes being investigated by the multinational team, sorting through the atrocities of Mariupol, Bucha, and other cities across Ukraine is challenging and time-consuming. The Center for Civil Liberties and its volunteers have joined the important effort to monitor and document these war crimes. The center trains average citizens to undertake this very difficult and often traumatic work. Ordinary people have become civil society activists documenting evidence of the atrocities and other devastating crimes. It is the belief in human dignity and in everyone's ability to support this larger cause that fuels the Center for Civil Liberties and their efforts to confront and document this stream of inhumane attacks on the ordinary people of Ukraine. Let's watch a brief video about the work of the Center for Civil Liberties and its leader.
My name is Alexandra Matvichuk. I'm a human rights defender, head of Center for Civil Liberties. When the full-scale Russian invasion began in February, Center for Civil Liberties restored our initiative Euromaidan SOS, which we created during the Revolution of Dignity. We brought up several hundreds of volunteers who work on different directions. One of them is documenting war crimes. I think that it's very hard to understand what's going on when you are not in the ground. It's very hard to be prepared for the war and for the whole atrocities. We're faced with enormous number of crimes, And it's very exhausting and difficult on as emotional as on professional level. And we do it only because a lot of people joined to this initiative and help us to document all this evidence, because we are in a hot stage of war, and this war crimes, unfortunately, is every day committed by Russian troops. And this is a very unique moment when a lot of people become a civil society activist, when we really understand what in our life is important and what does it mean to be a human being. I have never wished any nation to go through the war and have our experience, but this dramatic time provides opportunity for Ukrainian people to express their best features and to be better than we are. And Ukrainian civil society needs support from ordinary people from other countries. I know that ordinary people have much more power than they even expected to have. And massive mobilization of ordinary people in different countries can change this world for better.
It's now my pleasure to ask Oksana to join me on the stage, and it's my honor to present to you the Center for Civil Liberties and National Endowment for Democracy 2022 Democracy Award.
I would like to emphasize once again that this war has a distinct value dimension. And Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. And now in this war with Russia, Ukraine is fighting for our democratic choice, and we are paying a very high price for it. Russia attempts to break Ukraine resistance and occupy the country by what I call the immense pain of civilian population. That's why Russia uses the war crimes as the methods of this war. Russian troops enjoyed impunity in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Syria, in Libya. We must break this circle of impunity. We must establish an international hybrid tribunal and hold these criminals accountable. Freedom and human dignity have always come first for Ukrainians, and we will defend our country, our people, our freedom, and our human dignity. And we also understand our historical responsibility, because if we will not be able to stop Putin in Ukraine, he will go further. So we will continue to defend the values of the free world. And with the support of the free world, we will win. Thank you.
Congratulations. I've got to excuse myself to go confront those votes that you so adequately described. So I don't know who's in charge here. I think the House was supposed to award these, but they're busy, and I've tried to clean up their messes before. I hope that you're better at it than I am. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today.
Well, thank you, Senator, for being with us, and I know you'll do a terrific job on those votes you're going to confront now. We were hoping that Chairman Meeks could be with us to present the additional awards. Since he too is involved on the House floor this time, we are going to proceed without him, regrettably. But let me begin. Russia's war against Ukraine has created a humanitarian crisis of enormous scale, as citizens in eastern Ukraine are held hostage by relentless Russian bombardment that prevents the transfer of food, medicine, and other essential supplies. All over the country, millions of Ukrainians have been internally displaced or have become refugees outside of Ukraine. All over the country, attacks on residential buildings, schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure have produced enormous need for help with housing, feeding, and evacuating endangered Ukrainians. To help meet this need, the Ukrainian Volunteer Service has trained and coordinated over 100,000 citizen volunteers, ordinary people who are unified in the desire to do anything they can to help Ukraine achieve victory and alleviate the suffering of their people. The organization got its start after Anna Bondarenko returned from studying in California as a teenager. She had discovered a passion for volunteer service while in the United States. And when she returned to her home of Odessa, she wanted to find that same fulfillment and sense of purpose in Ukraine. But she realized that the culture and relationships for volunteering didn't really exist in Ukraine. So Anna and a group of friends in Odessa founded Ukrainian Volunteer Service in 2017 to promote a culture of volunteerism across the country. In addition to matching volunteers with a wide variety of causes, UVS also builds the capacity of young activists and provides volunteer management training for organizations. UVS's large network of trained volunteers and charitable organizations across Ukraine enable them to mobilize quickly following the full-scale Russian invasion in February. With Ned funding, the organization helped set up volunteer action centers to connect ordinary Ukrainians, including many who have never volunteered before, with relief efforts in their local communities. Right after the invasion, UVS also launched a chatbot on Telegram for streamlining communications and a new online emergency response center where trained volunteer managers respond to requests for help with evacuation, humanitarian support, food, medicine, or finding relatives. In the last 2.5 months, UVS has processed more than 50,000 requests from all over the country. We're going to watch now in a brief video, and we'll hear more about UVS from Anna.
I'm Anna Bondarenko, and I'm the founder and the CEO of Ukrainian Volunteer Service. On February 24, right after the Russian invasion, we changed all of our activities and we became focused 100% on supporting the people who are in need. We have processed already more than 50,000 requests from all over the country. We've been able to mobilize more than 100,000 people to volunteer. What we are seeing right now is that many people who have started to volunteer, they had no volunteering experience before the invasion. Despite all the horrors of the war, the whole country is unified around the idea to volunteer, to help, to support the people in need. That is something that will stay with them after the victory. And I'm sure that after the victory, Ukraine will be a whole different country. I'm totally sure that the one thing that we as a team will be focused after the victory will be working really hard with all those people who have experienced volunteering on a local level. And we will need those people. We'll have a lot of work in order to rebuild the cities that have been burned to the ground. And the territories of the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, the territories of Crimea, they have people who have been living under the Russian propaganda for the 8 years. We will have to work with those people, to connect with those people, to find ways to engage with those people. And I'm sure that volunteering is one of actually the easiest ways, to help those people experience that they're needed, that they're a part of Ukrainian culture, they're the part of Ukrainian community, and they're really welcomed here. We have to fight until our last breath. We have to fight and we have to stay here. Because if Russia will be led to win over Ukraine, the other countries will be next. And that is something that people have to understand about Ukraine. We will not surrender, not because we don't want to. We will not surrender because there is no way we can. Because if we surrender, we will just stop existing. And apparently this is not an option for us.
And on behalf of the NED, it is my great pleasure to present to you and the Ukrainian Volunteer Service the National Endowment for Democracy's 2022 Democracy Award.
Thank you so much for honoring Ukrainian civil society and especially volunteers. And I'm so proud to be here on behalf of all those people who are at that very moment in Ukraine, helping people in need all around the country, helping the military and helping to save lives. The one thing that I know is that Ukrainian volunteer movement has been magnificent over those 105 days. It has been resilient, it has been strong, it has been brave, and it has been doing everything to match the two goals, to save the lives, and of course, to make the victory happen as soon as we can. And I'm so thankful to all of you for supporting Ukrainians, for being with Ukraine, for being for Ukraine, and for fighting as Ukrainians fight. Because in order to win this fight, in order to win this war, we need all of the support that we can get. And I know that the NED team and all of you here who are celebrating today with us are doing everything you can to support Ukraine. So thank you so much for that.
Before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, corruption was one of the major challenges facing Ukrainian democracy. Our final award this evening recognizes the efforts of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, commonly known as ANTAC. Longtime NED grantee, it has been on the front lines of Ukraine's reform movement, fighting for transparency and the rule of law. Today, ANTAC is using its expertise in anti-corruption campaigns and advocacy to rally international support focused on victory and a stronger democratic Ukraine. ANTAC co-founder Daria Kaleniuk first became involved in anti-corruption work when she joined a youth civil society organization during her legal studies in Kharkiv. She participated in various advocacy projects, but noticed that the persistent corruption was hampering progress on most issues. So Daria founded ANTAC with colleague Vitaly Shabudin to advocate for systemic changes in Ukraine and use international legal tools to tackle political corruption. For the past decade, ANTAC and other civil society groups advocated for reform and made important progress. After the 2014 Revolution of Dignity, Ukraine passed several anti-corruption reforms, a central public procurement database, electronic asset declarations for public servants, and the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the High Anti-Corruption Court. Since Russia's February invasion, Daria and several of her colleagues left Ukraine as refugees. But this has not stopped their advocacy. This February, ANTAC launched the campaign Block Putin Wallets, successfully urging Western countries to seize the assets of Russian oligarchs. This effort helped to expose corruption as a global problem that was advancing Putin's agenda, and the campaign is successfully pushing democracies to align their practices with their democratic values. ANTAC has also joined several other organizations to establish the International Center for Ukrainian Victory in Warsaw, Poland. This coalition is working together to advocate for military assistance, strengthening sanctions, and funding to rebuilding Ukraine after the war. ANTAC is already preparing for post-war Ukraine, planning to push for reforms to advance the rule of law, to guarantee business competitiveness, and to establish transparency mechanisms to make sure that reconstruction aid is used effectively. We will now watch a brief video about ANTAC and its leader, Daria Kaleniuk.
I'm Daria Kaleniuk. I'm the Executive Director of Anti-Corruption Action Center. We started up because we thought that corruption is the key root of all other problems in Ukraine. It's not an easy task to tackle corruption, and therefore it took the last 10 years of my life. But now I see that some progress and results in building rule of law and fighting corruption in Ukraine pose a serious threat to Russian totalitarian regime. I'm proud of my people, and I understand that Ukrainians will not give up. Success in Ukraine, success for people living in dignity, means end of authoritative kleptocracy in Russia. There are so many groups, grassroots campaigns, initiatives that are working hard to achieve victory, that it's impossible to track them. Before, the entire world was saying that Ukrainian civil society is strong, but it's only in Kyiv. But now we have shown that entire Ukrainian people are civil society. These are millions of Ukrainians, every one of whom found its role. We're thinking about victory, and we understand that it is a marathon. Once we will achieve victory, we will need to rebuild Ukraine, reconstruct Ukraine, and to make our country the country which is even better than we had before the war. We paid very high price for ability and for chance to live in freedom and in dignity. We are now paying with human lives, with thousands of human lives. And for Ukrainian people, life in dignity means life where there is justice.
It is my honor to present to you, Daria, and the Anti-Corruption Action Center, the National Endowment for Democracy's 2022 Democracy Award.
It's big honor, but also a big responsibility to receive this award on behalf of all Ukrainian civil society. And I'm staying here and I'm thinking that I probably don't deserve staying here because I have my hands, I have my legs, I'm not wounded, I'm not in trenches, while so many Ukrainians, thousands of my compatriots are risking their lives. I'm alive. Thousands, tens of thousands are not alive. So I would like to have a minute of silence to commemorate all those heroes, all those soldiers, and all those civilians who suffered for the freedom and for defending Ukraine. Thank you. I think for all those who paid the price of life, the best award will be victory in this war. But we have to avoid protracted war for years. Victory has to be achieved fast, because every day of war means losses of lives, means terror, rapes, and other horrors. And I will devote every minute of my life, apart when I just need to sleep, to achieve this victory. And this victory means, as I have already told, not only making sure Russians go out of Ukrainian occupied territories, but having security guarantees in form of weapons all across Ukraine to prevent our neighbor, Russia, to attack again. Victory means that there is a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, for the reconstruction and rebuilding all those damages which were done to my country. Freedom means that we are on the fast track to the EU membership. We have shown that we are fighting for the values on which the European Union was founded, and we deserve EU membership. We'll fight for all the reforms needed to get it done. Victory means that Russia will be held accountable, and Russia will repay all those damages and horrors which they done to Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian people. This is what victory means for me, and this is what victory means for millions and millions of Ukrainians. I also want to thank to kind hearts of American people, because our victory in Ukraine depends on support of every single American who believes in dignity, in freedom, in humanity. And I know that American people help a lot by talking to their politicians, by donating to various humanitarian organizations to make this war victorious for Ukraine as soon as possible. I also want to end up with a quote of Taras Shevchenko, as he was mentioned already at the beginning. He mentioned a very important thing. Do a small thing, and the big one will happen itself. So let's get back to business, do small things, and we will achieve the victory. Slava Ukraini! Thank you.
I think we would all agree that it is particularly fitting that the 2022 Ned Democracy Award has paid tribute to Ukraine's civil society leaders who have been playing such an extraordinary role in defense of their country at a time of great peril. Peril for its democracy, its territorial integrity, its independence, its freedom, its very right to exist. They have inspired us by their commitment, their courage, their resilience, their unstinting efforts, whether in spearheading humanitarian responses for medicine, food, transportation, and so much more, monitoring human rights violations, taking the testimony of eyewitnesses and documenting war crimes, mounting logistics efforts, countering misinformation, advocating around the world for support that Ukraine needs to defend itself against Russia's unprovoked attack. As we've been hearing, they have been doing whatever it takes. We have been witnessing the spirit of self-sacrifice and voluntarism across Ukraine. It was the Ukrainian people who in 2004 took to the streets in nonviolent protest against election fraud. They captured the imagination of the world with their stirrings of an embryonic civic movement. I can still hear the rhythmic chant of the Orange Revolution, Razom, together, we are many, we cannot be defeated. It was disappointing that enduring reforms did not result, but Putin, no doubt, saw the power of democratic activism and began to adopt repressive measures against his own people. Then again in 2013, with the Revolution of Dignity on the Maidan, 500,000 people from all walks of life, across generations, and from all parts of the country, again came together to protest authoritarianism, massive corruption of the Yanukovych government, and called for integration with Europe and democratic values. Its autocratic president was overthrown, and the Maidan catalyzed the development of a stronger civil society and voluntary movement that we see and heard so much about today. Putin responded to the Maidan revolution by seizing Crimea and invading Ukraine in the east. And Ukrainian civil society responded by supporting the armed forces, forming volunteer battalions, and aiding the growing numbers of displaced, and becoming a growing force for reform and democracy, a force for human rights and ending corruption. And this civil society movement has been represented extraordinarily so by the awardees today. I think it's fitting that 4 remarkable women are representing them and their organizations in Ukraine, because the Ukrainian women have been providing great leadership. They are on the front lines of change in their society. It has not always been thus, and I think it bodes well for Ukraine's future that they are doing this kind of remarkable work and demonstrating this kind of leadership. As Secretary Blinken noted, Ukraine's democracy and civil society stands in stark juxtaposition to the society and system that Putin has constructed in Russia. Ukraine's secret weapon against Russia has been its civil society. The world has been seeing the results of this extraordinary labor that you've heard today in the Ukrainian people's coming again together in the defense of their democracy, and that role and the role that these awardees and their organizations and so many more will be playing in the years to come will be even more important as Ukraine recovers, rebuilds, and revitalizes its democracy after victory. So thank you all so much.
I wanted to thank our awardees and to all of our participants for joining us this afternoon, Senator Risch, Ambassador Makarova, and Applebaum, and Ambassador Vervier. I wanted to once again to recognize Daria, Alexandra, Anna, and Natalia, who so eloquently remind us of our individual and collective responsibilities to assist their cause. We salute your courage, and on behalf of the endowment, I pledge our continued support for your mission, which in the world is inexorably linked to the well-being of democracy in Europe and the world. I also want to thank the Ned staff who worked to make this event happen. Ned's Europe team, especially Tanya Bullock, Asia Ivancheva, Christine Nugent, and Ryan Knight, and the Government Relations and Public Affairs team, including Shivani Vakaria, Frank Bonner, Zach Evans, Kate Wagner, Christine Bednars, Sarah Hudson, Bridget Corna, Michael Dugan, and Caitlin Robertson. I'd like to, and the wonderful films that was produced in-house. Just in conclusion, I'd like to take the liberty to end on a personal note. My grandfather came from Kremenets and left Ukraine during a particularly difficult time for him and his family, and never to have returned to his country of birth. I only wish he was alive today to witness the cause for which you and millions of your fellow citizens are fighting, what Daria called the new family. So thank you for being with us. Thank all of you for being with us. And if Anne could come up with Milan and we can get a picture with all of the awardees together.
Thank you so much.